our raffle prizes. Good morning. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board of Work session. It is Wednesday, June 14th, 2023. It is 9:13 a.m. The session is set to go until 11 or 10? 11, okay. This is a hybrid meeting. We're at 3000 Pacific Avenue Southeast from 110. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Sterling Garcia, I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Tom Menser. To my left is Commissioner Barry Edwards. Also in the boardroom, we have County Manager Amanda Chavez, as well as Assistant County Manager Rob Gelder. We have Joshua Cummings, who is the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, as well as Andrew DeFobis and Jeremy Davis to discuss the SMP public hearing follow-up. And so
Right to Josh, this is a follow-up to the May 24th briefing that you had already. You provided additional perspective, and the board decided to keep the record open until the end of May, and that will give staff additional time to gather additional comments and provide perspective to you this morning. So with that in mind,
Thank you, County Manager. I am Joshua Cummings, the Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, CPED. I want to start again by saying thank you to the Board of County Commissioners and the Planning Commission and staff. This is, again, another big step on this long-standing project. And we do have 2 hours today. The goal is to listen and review the public comment. And what we heard from that was there was some big general themes that we need to get ironed out and have the Board of County Commissioners understand fully, and then move on, as we discussed previously. Those items that we make decisions, that the board makes decisions on, will inform those individual requests that were made by citizens on their property. So that'll come back later after we have this long, just general conversation about the big main items that Andy's going to discuss. And we know this is technical stuff. We have to have it in technical language that we submit to ecology, but our goal is to try and take that technical language and translate it into common language so we can have those decisions go forward, which is why we have 2 hours. So know that this is gonna be kind of a iterative process as we work through the communication, trying to stay on task and keep the discussion to the points that we're trying to engage on is gonna be helpful for the individuals that are asking us to review their individual projects. So if we veer into a territory that's not serving the applicants that are trying to get their individual designations, I will try and take the time to bring us back to the general topics so that we can serve those folks that have those needs. But I think Andy's done a really nice job of putting together the big main bullet points, and so I'll let him take it from here.
Great, thank you. And Nero's got the PowerPoint. I'm also having technical issues this morning, so while that's coming up, I am Andrew DeFobis. I'm a senior planner with Community Planning and Economic Development. So I'm here today to talk to you about the Shoreline Master Program update and continue to work through issues on the other side of the public hearing. Next slide. So I'll give you a brief project background, and then we'll take a look at some of the specific topic areas that were highlighted by the board at your May 24th briefing. And then we will end on, end on some next steps in the board's review process. As try as we might, we won't get it all today.
So I think when I'm talking about the big general topics, those are the big four right there. Conforming versus non-conforming, no net loss, shoreline buffers, and then the decision matrix that we've talked about in the past with ecology. And I think that I want to jump on that comment real quick on the decision matrix because it's important that we have that listed near the bottom because those big three are the decision points. But there was, and I want to get this right out of the gate, a comment of how come the Planning Commission didn't see the matrix previous. We didn't have it built, I hadn't asked for it. It didn't exist while the Planning Commission was reviewing. So just to answer that question right out of the gate, that's why. It wasn't because we wanted to hide something from them. It was because it didn't exist at that time. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. Helpful.
County Manager?
yeah, I was just curious, in one of the topics areas, it was specific requests from a specific, well, is that part of the?
So that's what I said at the beginning. Those big four topics will inform the specific requests, and we need some of those decision points from the big four to get to those.
So we're gonna get down to the specific
If you look
request.
in the briefing memo, it kind of lays out what's being covered today and what's
Exactly.
gonna be deferred. I would quibble that these are the four most important, but there's four, and I think this is good. It shows so that's the ones I focused on for today. And then there's other issues
Yeah,
like
the
the
specifics.
designation and some of the specific, I forget the breakdown, but
Yeah.
we're gonna have to follow up.
Yep.
Hopefully we
Yep.
make some progress on these
Yeah,
items.
exactly.
Commissioner Edwards.
Gotta get the big rocks.
You mentioned that, that matrix did not exist, but is that applicable to this situation, that matrix? And is that fair for the planning commission to move ahead without certain material? I mean, that's my question. How crucial was that material? Did we get ahead of ourselves pushing this?
We couldn't make the matrix without the planning commission's input. Cause one of the columns was planning commission's recommendation, ecology's perspective,
Okay.
outcome. So the matrix couldn't exist until we had that
Okay.
information.
You're just chasing your tail.
Exactly. Big rocks.
But to Commissioner Menster's point, yeah, so the 4 items you see up there today are 4 of the many that I captured at the May 24th briefing. These were the ones that we thought we could turn around in the short time and bring back today, but there's a menu of things that are upcoming, and that menu will, at each briefing it'll get smaller and smaller as we get through things, but yeah, I'll put it in each briefing so you know what's coming down the pipe and where you've been and where you're going.
Can I ask on that? So is our goal to, if possible, to kind of reach a tentative decision on those issues and then we, the next briefing, we go to the next 4? I mean,
Yep.
I know there may not be possible, maybe some question comes up, maybe the board wants further analysis, but is that how it's structured, that
Yes.
maybe
Yep,
we
thumbs
just
up.
knock out decisions?
That will be ideal.
That's
If
exactly
we can
right.
just
Just making sure.
address
we all
one
hear that.
item, move on, and keep moving forward. That would
Okay.
be very good.
And those are the first big 4. Those are the big
And
rocks.
where does the planning commission come into play and their recommendations on, say, conforming and non-conforming? And then why is that a big issue? Because they're saying, let's do away with non-conforming, right? Who's saying, let's keep non-conforming? I guess that's my question, because state law allows you to do away with it. So why is it an issue, I
I
guess?
bet we'll answer your question when we get to that topic.
It's the first one, and I think I think we're gonna be able to get through it and set it aside. But really, the decision point is confirmation that you wanna take the approach that you mentioned. So I will jump right into that after this slide. So, brief background as I promised. Just for the record, the county is updating its shoreline master program as required by state law. These are the regulations that govern development and redevelopment along certain shorelines in the county, generally including our marine waters, our large lakes and large rivers, and associated critical areas. This project has been going on for several years. It spent multiple years under review by the Planning Commission, who made its review to the board back in August of 2022. Board began its review last October and recently had a public hearing in May. And right now, we're at that last bullet point on that slide where the board is reviewing the draft in the wake of the public hearing and preparing a final draft or giving the input for staff to help prepare that final draft for the board to consider adoption and ultimately submitting to ecology. Now, non-conforming versus conforming terminology. So this is the first of 4 broad areas that we're gonna cover today. In this issue, what we're talking about is how we refer to legally existing development that does not meet shoreline master program standards, such as a house that was built 30 feet from the shoreline, many years before there was a shoreline master program. You heard a lot of testimony at the public hearing that legally existing structures should be considered conforming. The draft that went to public hearing actually does use the word conforming to describe legally existing residential structures, and it uses legally non-conforming to refer to all other structures, lots, and uses falling into that category. And that change was made specifically for the public hearing draft. For some history on that issue, previous versions of the draft and multiple other sections of county code use the phrase non-conforming, which was what was at issue for many of the folks who commented. The Planning Commission's recommendation to the board said, use conforming for all of these. And so that's what came to the board from the Planning Commission. Ecology's review of that was, you can't do that for everything. It's not clear, but there are specific carve-outs in state law saying you can refer to residential structures and certain appurtenances as conforming. And that's under RCW 9058-620.
So that's a good overview, technical overview. So essentially what Andy's saying is, we did it. They asked us to do it, to make it conforming, to take away the non-conforming, and we did it for what we could. And we think that that resolves the questions that were asked from the residents. And that change was made already into the draft that was submitted for public hearing, for BoCC public hearing. And so the thumbs up, the decision on that would just be to proceed with the draft that you've already have out there for public hearing.
Okay, could you give me that RCW again?
Yep, 9058.6. Yep, 90.58.620.
Okay, and a follow-up maybe, why does staff, I guess, I'm gonna say, think it is necessary to follow some agenda, I guess, from ecology? Because they wanna go the most restrictive. The planning commission, along with the community, does not want to go the most restrictive. And the RCW, in my understanding, allows for it just to be disregarded as far as that non-conforming. Non-conforming affects your value, it affects your possibility of doing something with your property at a later date. It's kind of like a red flag there. Could affect interest rates. There's other things that it could affect. And it isn't always a building that is built prior to any regulatory process. It could be a building that is built in 100% compliance with regulatory process of the day. And so
Agreed.
I think, why should we take that away from citizens, I guess, if we're gonna talk about that topic? Why should government steal their value when they've done everything accordingly?
Can we go to the next slide, because that's kind of the decision point that
Right.
staff is asking for next, whether we're gonna go with option 1 or option 2.
Yeah.
Commissioner Mentor, I'll pass it back to you.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's stealing value, but that's beside the, I'm just wondering who you're arguing against, because and if you're saying, why did staff even bring this up? Because ecology recommended that we make that change. I would have been pretty pissed off had there been a recommendation from ecology, who has to ultimately approve this plan, and it got buried, and we didn't even get the choice to decide. So why staff brought it is because ecology made that recommendation, but I don't think the board is arguing with you about this. So I'm not sure.
Okay,
You sound
well,
kind of fired
I guess
up, and
I'm
I'm just like,
concerned. I'm just concerned, that's all.
and I disagree with your characterization of it, but I think ultimately we're gonna all get to the same result from different pathways.
Yeah, so really, as Josh mentioned, the draft that went to public hearing really took care of this issue for a lot of people, we believe, because the draft says legally existing residential structures are considered conforming. We can call them conforming. It does not change how they are regulated. They are still subject to the master program if they're adding on or doing something like that. But in a pure terminology perspective, they are called conforming in the draft. And so the option here is really just for the board to verify, let's go with that versus take that, do something else. It's just confirming for the record. But we did make those changes where we could in the draft to be responsive to public comment.
And recognizing, Commissioner Edwards, this has been a long-standing topic. It's gone back and forth. And sometimes when there's been a topic that's been confusing for a long time, it can be hard to take the win. This is a win. We got there. After all this time, we finally got there.
Well, we don't know until we get it through ecology, do we?
We did. We asked ecology and they said that we will accept this in your draft. That's the win.
Because the RCW provides the flexibility
For the residential.
for the residential side, and that is probably, is it fair to say that some of the public testimony that we receive about this issue, because some of the residents were looking at that old version of the draft that included the non-conforming language, but what it went to the public hearing already addressed that to a great extent.
Exactly.
Right.
So at this point, it really is what we asked the board is to confirm what already is in the draft, which is conforming structures on residential.
So wanna hone it down, there's a decision point in front of the board, there's option 1 or option 2. Is the board ready to move forward with this decision point? Or does the board need questions answered or have additional comments?
Ready to go.
Okay, ready to go? Okay, so there's option 1 or option 2, Commissioner Edwards,
Option one.
Commissioner Munson,
Go with option one, based on all the factors.
and option 1 for me as well.
Great.
I'm sorry if I'm a little bit giddy. This is huge and I'm super excited for this. This is a big deal. Thank you.
Let me know if you need some water.
I know, I'm working on it.
Visualizing, checking it off my list, that's very exciting.
It's exciting, it's
Okay.
exciting.
So yeah, we've reached
Done.
the first decision
Alright.
point.
Doing great. Okay, the second topic is it's a bit more open-ended, but you know, was derived from the briefing on May 24th. There were multiple public comments on how the draft addresses the concept of no net loss of ecological function. The board asked to come back and explore this topic. So ecological function, we'll read the definition from the draft, are the physical, chemical, and biological processes that contribute to the maintenance of the aquatic and terrestrial environments that constitute the shoreline's natural ecosystem. So when we talk about ecological function of the shoreline, we're talking about things like sediment transport, pollution filtration, fish and wildlife habitat, large woody debris recruitment into the waterways and things like that. So it's all the things that shorelines do. And the state requires that a county shoreline master program result in no net loss of ecological function as we implement that draft.
Same RCW by any chance?
Different and kind of sprinkled throughout, but I can get you some of those citations if you'd like them.
Well, I'm probably gonna need it at some point, maybe not. Let's not ask for it if we don't need it. I asked you for something earlier and we didn't need it. We made decisions.
Penciling it in, or you could follow up after the briefing. Sure, okay. So no net loss is addressed in the master program in many areas. It's kind of sprinkled throughout and it's got tendrils everywhere. So this concept of preserving no net loss in our shorelines is baked into the inventory and characterization work that's done at the beginning of the process that forms the foundation of our shoreline environment designations. It's in making sure we assign the correct designation to a given shoreline so that the requirements in the SMP for that shoreline reflect what's out there on the landscape. No net loss is part of the goals and policies that are developed early in the process and that inform the regulations in the SMP. And it's also in the individual permit requirements and the development standards that we apply to projects, having them demonstrate they're meeting no net loss, evaluating cumulative impacts for certain types of permits. And the standards for how and when you construct things and the materials you use, the timing, all those sorts of things are done through a lens of helping to preserve no net loss while we authorize development of the shorelines.
So I guess what I'd say on that one in common language is you gotta start somewhere. And this is an opportunity to start. And the SMP itself is trying to achieve this, but we won't know if we're doing it until we start.
And so we
Hold on a
also,
second.
oh, sorry.
Commissioner Evans is chomping at the bit.
Okay.
Go
I
ahead,
guess my
Commissioner.
question as you move forward is no net loss from when?
That's exactly what we're saying. We gotta start somewhere. And
Yeah, but from today, so are we gonna go and tell people bulkheads? I hear about bulkheads are detrimental. Okay, so yeah, how does that get addressed? Bill's got a bulkhead and Joe's building a house, but he can't put in a bulkhead, I guess. Is that kind of the way it is? Or does this individual have to remove his bulkhead? And if so, who pays for that? And who takes care of the shoreline wave damage to the property? So those are all kind of things that I'm curious about when I say time.
Yeah.
You know, from when?
So the Shoreline Master Program is not retroactive. It's not gonna require anyone to remove a bulkhead or tear up their lawn, replace it with vegetation, anything like that. It takes that snapshot for no net loss at the time of implementation. And so moving forward, any additional impacts that are proposed on the shoreline have to be in line with that no net loss. So the draft does allow people to replace their bulkheads. We want them to consider doing things like soft shore if they can, but they are allowed to replace. It's not retroactive.
So their bulkhead, a big log runs into it or something where the wave and breaks it.
Mhm.
Okay, so now if they don't fix it, it wrecks everything.
Yeah.
So are they allowed to fix it?
Yes, they are allowed to repair and they are allowed to replace after considering other types of.
And that same thing apply to docks and such as well? They can fix it, but what, they cannot build a dock? Or if they build a dock, it has to be within a more restrictive footprint or?
So they can repair docks. If you're doing something, a repair that's more than 50% of the structure, I believe that's where it's considered a new structure.
What was that?
More than
percentage?
50%, it would be considered a new structure, and then it would be subject to the new regulations. And yes,
So 50% bigger than it was before.
50% of the structure.
Got it.
So if you're,
a
a total
replacement.
repair would be considered, a replacement, right? If you're just a board snaps here and there, those things are below.
Right now, does a citizen need to get a permit to replace two boards in their dock?
No,
Mhm.
But if it's 50%
If it's a
more,
big
they need to
project,
get a
right.
permit.
correct.
Right, yeah, and that there, we'll get there on docks, that's a whole other,
I was gonna say docks and
Topic.
bulkheads are topics for a different work session, so.
Oh, they are.
yeah, oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just so you know.
Oh, okay, I just want to ask a question. We've had a complaint out of Lawrence Lake about shoreline activity that's taking place, obviously in violation, I think, of the Shoreline Management Act. But they went ahead and did it even against a red flag filed by your department.
Yeah.
So where does that leave them? We enact this, that's still, we're gonna hold them to the newer standard if they went ahead and did it without a permit and everything, right?
So are we talking case specific? Because in that
Well,
case, we're in
I was
legal
trying not
discussion.
to talk case specific, but I don't even know if you know about the case.
I do,
Oh, you do?
yeah, and we can't talk about it because we're in legal discussion.
Okay, so we won't talk about it.
And so the point is that people are always gonna do something and we have mechanisms to push back on that, but we're not the law. We don't
Okay.
have law enforcement capabilities.
Hypothetically, anybody who builds anything without a permit, there are issues associated with that. I mean, regardless of the improvements.
That's right.
Okay.
So the no net loss, back to the topic, is, as Andy said, a snapshot. And the baseline of information is what we, as staff and the planning commission and all the research that's gone into it, is our best shot at that snapshot in time. And then when we implement the SMP, we'll be looking to see if what we have included in the plan is actually doing what we ask it to do. And it's hard to determine no net loss, because think about our shorelines. Not only are there different designations, but they're crooked, right? You can't just measure it with a yardstick. It's difficult to see all of the different miles and miles of shoreline. But our goal is all baked in, as Andy said, to achieve no net loss. And so the question, I think we'll get to the decision point, is do you think that we've done a good job in the draft that the planning commission recommended to the board, that we put to public hearing, and addressing the no net loss issue? And can we take that snapshot and move forward? Go for it, Commissioner.
Mr. Munster.
So, I read the briefing and I understand. So one question is, are any of these metrics new from the new, like compared to the old draft?
The project and program tracking is absolutely, so we're gonna talk about that in a second, but the current master program has designations, it's got goals and policies, permit development standards. The restoration plan might also be new, I'm not sure if we have one of those currently, but the nuts and bolts of the SMP are relatively the same, they have a corollary now versus.
So the argument is that it hasn't been working, we're not maintaining no net loss, and the law says we have to design this plan to achieve no net loss, to achieve.
We don't even have
Not just to shoot for it,
Yeah,
but to actually make sure that we accomplish it.
right.
So I'm comfortable with using this as a starting point, but I would wanna take that suggestion from the public to create a marine resources committee and basically let them, with this as a starting point, develop a set of metrics that can be, additional metrics that they think, and because I think staff's, putting this on the back of our staff, you guys, you're gonna pivot to other projects, and it's just, unless we dedicate resources to it, and if the community is willing to provide some of that resource through volunteers and being willing to look at these metrics and kind of the way SWAB has developed a set of metrics, and come back and report to the board, so we can really make sure that we're following the law and achieving no net loss.
Can you
I know there's multiple counties that have done this.
Can you broaden on that just a little bit more? Will be like like an advisory committee?
Yeah, it's a
just-
marine, it was in several of the public comments about a marine
committee.
resources
Yeah,
committee that would, I mean, it'd be like SWAB is what I look at it as, with some staff support. And they would be able to just track, do some of the work, that, you know, that staff's hoping they can do, but then also they can look at the science and say, here's other things you could measure to make sure we've got enough eelgrass beds, we've got enough, you know, what total.
will they be tracking the sea level rise?
They can track the sea level rise for Commissioner Edwards. And then we've got a really a more robust adaptive management tool.
County,
Commissioner was having.
I guess as we move forward with this, who's gonna make the call? And I guess the way I'm looking at it is if we take a marine biologist that belongs, that works for a land use attorney, okay? And a marine biologist that works for us, so they're both on the committee. The one working for the land use attorney is, you know, obviously looking out for a client, potentially for a client. How do we make sure that we have a fair and balanced approach to something just like what you're proposing? Just so we don't stack it with folks from FutureWise that
Yeah.
wanna go way over here, and we don't stack it with folks from the attorney's office that wants to go way over here. How do we reach middle ground on recommendations coming out of that?
I think that they have to develop a set of things that can be measured, like the measurable things. And then you're relying on actual data, and then they present those measurables to they've decided these are important measurables, and then they present them to the board and we decide. And there's no politicization of it, you know, there's 500 feet of new armoring in Thurston County. There's 3 acres less eelgrass habitat. That's, you know, however you measure things like this. Maybe that's not measurable, but whatever they come up with that can be measured, they present that data and they work on a report that then we can decide, okay, does this mean no net? And then staff can look at that report and advise us. Are we slipping backwards on no net loss? Because and then that informs our next iteration of the shoreline master plan, which is right around the corner, probably.
that's not, oh, go ahead, County Manager.
That's how I see it anyway.
No, and I think what the way you're describing, Commissioner, and I think the plan includes is the assessment of non-net loss at the macro level is more area-wide as opposed to get down to the micro level.
Absolutely.
And that's really, I think, is fundamental difference and when the board needs to consider because the non-net loss is area-wide, micro level. And how a committee as you propose can probably look holistically, the whole area and the non-net loss at that level, considering all the minute permits that we might be processing, that may be affected. Because the non-net loss is now gonna be managed at the micro level, the permit level.
Go ahead.
So,
Very
not opposed to that, seems like a good idea to me, especially it is, you know, what we heard but I think just that if the board is going to head in that direction, that we really do need to set some guidelines or some boundaries. So it doesn't go one way or another, and it's actually about what are the actual measurables, you know, of the no net loss, like what is actually happening. And so I think if we do go that direction, I would want really set and clear boundaries and expectations set.
Oh, and if I might add, if we do establish a committee for this, it would be those boundaries that would provide the sideboards for them, and then also your appointment process for who you place on that committee as a board.
So I want to pull back just a little bit. I'm thinking with those sideboards and with the parameters, and I want to check in with Andy here. We have a process with our Conservation Futures Ranking Committee that you're not standing up a whole new board, so the board's not worried about the appointments, but Andy works through making sure that it's got broad representation. And the Board of County Commissioners gets to see who's on that representation and decides if they feel like it's a balanced representation. And then that ranking committee brings to you their recommendations on conservation features. It seems like that might be a good model for this Marine Resource Committee. Any thoughts? Andy first, does that make sense?
I think in the sense that the board would, stand up, these are the slots and these are the types of folks we want.
Yeah.
And that gets to Commissioner Edwards' point of making sure that it's got balanced representation. And then, it could be something like SWAB or Planning Commission or anything else where people are interested, they wanna sign up, and that gets the board's approval before they're on that committee.
And with SWAB, I was really impressed with the level of expertise that those community members brought, and it was very clear that they were, like, they had worked in that area in their, like, past life, like they were engineers that did that. And just different levels of expertise, but then there were also community members who cared, like, about, certain things that were also involved, and so something like that, I think would work. Commissioner Edwards starts.
I guess, I'm thinking about mitigation and how that might play into, issues, I guess, and you mentioned, Commissioner Mentor, you mentioned eelgrass, but, maybe that's not the right one, but it maybe is an example of, how mitigation could come into play, where a lesser amount of eelgrass, for an example, that affects the herring spawning, because they use the grass for eggs and that kind of stuff. But we found out that putting Christmas trees in, and it was actually by accident, I think people were throwing Christmas trees away and they ended up in the marsh areas. And as they deteriorated over a period of time, they became the replacement for herring spawn. And so there's a mitigation issue that does take place. I'm not using that as any one specific example. I'm just saying there's always some mitigation. So if we put all the excess Christmas trees in, all along different places, we'd even enhance that. It's not that there wouldn't be any loss, there'd be gain for that particular biological function, I guess. So I don't know how we would put that into the matrix to make it work, and I'm not advocating for that. I'm just saying we have to have something in place to allow certain things to mitigate. And how would we figure that out? And that's where the professionals maybe come in that would agree or disagree. It could get pretty complicated.
Good conversation. Oh, did you?
No, I was gonna say that the SMP as drafted does have a series of mitigation options, depending on the application that would come through under review. So I think part of this is, while it's at the macro level, it will be done on a permit by permit, parcel by parcel level to make sure that whatever the activity is does not degrade the ecological function. And I think what this will boil down to, and probably is worth a future briefing or conversation, or what are those metrics that are being utilized to be able to demonstrate that no net loss in terms of permit activity, et cetera.
And then I guess my concern
There you
is
go.
that you don't overburden the individual that is, what do you refer to it as, Andy, selfers or,
Do-it-yourselfers?
do it
From yesterday, yeah.
yourselfers, you said. I like that term, because there's a lot of that. And developers are one thing, and they pretty much know the rules, but do-it-yourselfers don't know the rules. And I think we ought to be able to help them and not always require, okay, you gotta go to the hearings examiner. Well, the hearings examiner, I can tell you from firsthand experience, can be a couple of years getting there, many thousands of dollars to get through the process. And you end up, because the hearings examiner says, well, what other use is feasible for this property? Well, no other use. You can't put an ice cream stand there or in a gas station. So, and they let you if you spend the money. I don't want the citizen to have to spend that money. So is that gonna be something we can get into where maybe that committee gets to, can make a review recommendation or something, and everything doesn't hinge on only the rich get to do things.
So I just want to say that, because Ramiro made the point, like this committee in my proposal has nothing to do with individual decisions and individual mitigation. The point is taking it up a level, like all these decisions that Rob talked about, are they working? You got to look at the high level, and figure out how to measure the overall ecological function. Are all these little mitigation plans that we've approved, does it in the aggregate
Are effective.
achieve the legal directive to accomplish no net loss? And I think when you hear a lot about net ecological gain, and I think where that's coming from is the frustration that it's really just a failure of really affecting no net loss in this way, in a more comprehensive way. We wouldn't really need net ecological gain as a concept. It's just that people are frustrated at the way no net loss policies have been working on the ground are failing. So they want to go to the next step. But but what I'm trying to do is find a place in the middle where we don't have to go to net ecological gain, but we really are serious about no net loss.
And so to the assistant county manager's point on metrics, Andy's got the slide up on what would be being measured
Right.
on that no net loss by that group to look at the macro level. And it's the concept of what's the information, what's the data, that's why the snapshot is important. And then that's what would be reviewed going forward to really ground truth. Are we losing ecological? Where are we? And so that's really what the question is. Do you want to go through the different pieces?
I can, yeah. And 2 points I would add to this list is that this is not all of the ones that are currently envisioned in the SMP. It's a selection for the conversation. And 2, the SMP draft is worded in a way that it's not static. It can change over time. So as science indicates, you should really be tracking these or this, or maybe not this one so much. It's flexible enough to allow that without amending the Shoreline Master Program. But as we've kind of alluded to here, yes, staff in a combination of committee, however that gets set up, will be monitoring no net loss over time as we implement the SMP. They're going to look at all the projects that get approved and what sort of impacts those are having for the shoreline. So looking at the types and size of development that's authorized, docks, roads in shoreline jurisdiction, bridge and culvert crossings. It's going to be looking at the types of permits that we issue, the variances, and making sure that those are in line with the criteria. And then changes that occur on the landscape that may potentially degrade ecological function. So changes in impervious surface or introduced fill, new shoreline armoring, decreases in vegetation or other habitat parameters, and the opposite too, in areas where we see there's new growth of vegetation or new planting. We'd be looking at those things as well to get a sense of net loss. And then the amount of protected area, that goes back to the restoration plan, which helps to facilitate and encourage restoration on the landscape, and also looking at, from a watershed or broader scale perspective, what are the actions of others on the landscape and how are those benefiting shorelines. So Josh mentioned conservation futures, where you have Capital Land Trust protects property over here. Well, that's something we can, help to measure in the SMP and say areas are being protected, and that's helping to preserve function and guard against future net loss.
So development and preservation.
Right.
Is all this measuring stuff new? Because I've never seen in my 5 years here, your staff coming to say, here's our report on where we're at with no net loss and giving me all the numbers and all these metrics.
It is new because the 1990 era, that generation of master programs did not have a no net loss requirement. There currently is no requirement to measure or track these things in the SMP that we have.
And that's why this is so important to start now. We haven't done it.
That's great, and I think a committee would really help you with your work.
We accept that,
And
yeah.
keeping all of us accountable that it's getting done and reported to the board.
Sorry.
Let me get.
No, I like to hear Rob, he's
Well,
got,
no, I think it's great that we'll be tracking, but I think the caveat there is that it will take resources, right? There's a certain amount of capacity in existing staff. It's additive. And so it can't just happen without the board considering or having a conversation in the future around how do we measure, what's the cost of measuring that?
And that will be a policy decision.
Thank you.
Commissioner Edwards, and then I'll say something.
I just want to use an example how of no net loss and what it really means. So, docks, for an example. Do we want shade over the water or not? Do we want an impervious dock or not? Is a dock a gain versus a loss? And could it be a gain depending on the material used and maybe the size? So who's gonna come, is that part of maybe the matrix that we're talking about here that could be developed? So a dock that allowed sunlight through, and you could do that with corrugated steel, for an example. You know, they oftentimes use it on slick surfaces or something. So light does get through. Or a cement material that nothing gets through, no water, no anything. So who's gonna make those determinations, and how do we get to that point so that we can have fairness? And that's kind of where I'm coming from, is trying to treat people as fairly as we possibly can and still have that no net loss or gain. Either one, or maybe do something over here that is a mitigation that would offset that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how that's all gonna fit.
Good question, and I wanna make sure that we get kind of the holistic picture. So the topic that we're looking at now on the no net loss is, do you want us to start measuring it, and do you like the metrics that we've presented? And then the dock question, definitely in the terms of the shade and the variances and how it mimics tree shade versus protective species of the fish that go under a dock. It's too dark, they get scared, they go out to sea, they get eaten by a big fish. There's all different things. that
That's
we
not
can-
the way it happens. They hide under there from the big fish.
That's not what I learned at Salmon Recovery Council.
And so we can have that conversation, but I wanna make sure that we stay focused on this decision point so we can keep the process moving forward. Do you like that we wanna start? Do you like the snapshot? Can we move forward?
So,
I think there's a
I-
typo
I
in there,
was
right?
gonna-
Is the non-net loss on the option?
Yeah, so really I didn't have strong options for the board on this topic. Unfortunately, it was just that you've heard a lot of things about no net loss, and the board wanted to explore it. So hearing everything you've heard about what the draft includes, are there additional changes that anyone wants? The committee is one that we heard and can,
That's
explore.
Yeah.
so I believe for me that tracking metrics and data is always extremely important. It's hard sometimes to make decisions about the future without knowing kind of the data of the past, right? And so from my viewpoint, I always think it's very important to track that. Commissioner Edwards, you said that yesterday as, we were doing the climate presentation, right? That it's hard for you to tell people, right? If you can't point it on a stick and be like, this is where it was and this is kind of where it is. And I think that's kind of what this will really, tracking those metrics will help us as we move forward into the future. As years later, we're drafting a new SMP, and just being able to have that data and being like, okay, this is where we were and this is where we're at now. And I do agree. I think that with that, it is a definite policy decision the board will have to take. So there has to be a commitment from the board on that. I do like the idea that Commissioner Menster suggested about having a committee kind of help with this as well in a way. Because I think it will give that community input. We'll be able to really see the data and then maybe provide yearly updates. Not sure how that will work, but so that's kind of like my viewpoint on this. It's just tracking those metrics, I think, is very important for us to move forward, and it's a shame we haven't really been doing it so far, but it is kind of what it is, right? Commissioner Edwards.
So from my position, I guess I wonder if we're prepared to make this decision right now. And the reason I say that, Commissioner Menser and I have a different opinion of maybe what is beneficial and what is not. But who could help us realize, you know, you learned something in your salmon recovery process. And obviously, they must have made some determination that that shade's bad or shade's good. I don't know the answer to it. I'm just going by having been a kid fishing around docks. You know, you can get stuff under the dock. Anyway, so I would like to hear from some of those folks that maybe a marine biologist. I keep referring back to that because I think of them as maybe the experts. So before we maybe make that decision, let's hear a little bit more.
There's a subtopic on docks and bulkheads
Yeah.
that's gonna be at a later work session, and maybe that's a good,
Well,
So,
oh,
Commissioner
yeah,
Edwards, so-
but do we need to make the decision?
I don't think it relates to this.
Yeah, so this is just basically to track data. It's basically, you know, and I think,
A structure for
yeah,
tracking the data.
yeah, a structure for tracking the data. And so it's not having anything really to do with the permitting side but just to basically track it.
We can
That's,
debate later whether we wanna try to, you know, count the number of docks or count this, or count the number of impervious surfaces or the gratings or whatever it is. And we may wanna go into 5 or 6 subcategories about docks, so we know what kinds of docks we're getting and all that.
But aren't both those about the same? Is there additional information needed? Sounds like yes, we need additional information. And does the board wish to make any changes to the draft SMP as they relate to
As
this?
it relates to the not net loss.
Yeah,
think that
I mean,
is
so-
a little type on there, right?
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, do you want to make any changes to the draft related to no net loss, or do you need additional information to
but
make
that's where
that
I'm
decision?
thinking that maybe we don't have enough information to make that decision. I mean, there's nothing says we have to do that today.
so
Maybe
what
the-
information would you need, Commissioner Edwards?
Well, that I'm not exactly sure. I'd like to hear from people to settle the dispute, say, between Commissioner Menser's position and my position. I'd like to hear what a marine biologist says about that and why they say that. And does it depend on the species of fish, for an example? Does it depend on the food source that might be under there that a species of fish would utilize? I don't know the answer to those.
I'd love to have that conversation, but like I say, I think it's teed up for a subsequent work session.
Okay,
I believe the decision before you at this point is a 10,000-foot level.
Yeah.
Is the concept of a non-net loss that you would like to include at the SMP. That is the question before you. And the details will have to follow because there is many decisions at the granular level that you have to be involved. But the question here is the non-net loss included on the SMP. Is that concept acceptable to the board at this point as presented?
okay, let me ask this question then on that particular topic, no net loss. So does no net loss mean absolute, or does no net loss mean, well, you can give up 20% net loss to do this? I'm just curious exactly what that means. If it means with mitigation, no net loss, you know, that kind of thing.
Hold
I'm
on.
giving up 20%.
No,
I said, I can tell you that it doesn't mean that. It means, it's absolute, but there's ways to get there.
But we can mitigate that possibly.
Yeah,
Possibly.
absolutely.
My position is that we can only do that if we're simultaneously tracking at an aggregate level and proving that it's working. Then we can keep doing the mitigation. If it's proving that it's not working, then we have to go back and tweak our SMP
What
to
additional
make sure
strategies you need
that
to
we're,
implement?
turn the dials a little bit here and there to make sure we get there.
Because within the process, a property owner may decide to remove a bulkhead. It does, and that is again on the overall environment.
On that metric.
But at the
That
same
metric.
time, he wants to put in a dock.
Well, no,
So
but
longer,
you know,
maybe
but
it's a
there's-
trade-off.
but it's all that, but
Yeah.
that's all that balance, but at this point is the conceptual aspect of the non-net loss to be included in the SMP. And yeah, that's really the conversation
That's right.
and the question that we asked the board to weigh in.
All this was part of it's part of the current draft approved by the planning commission, right?
Correct.
So this is not,
That's right.
this structure is not something we're throwing in. Now, I'm throwing in a helper
Yeah, how to.
component of, I'd wanna see either the Marine Resource Committee, my preference. If I got voted down on that, I would be asking for, that there be things explicitly added that would be like mandatory, like periodic reporting to the board about the different pieces of the data reporting. I mean, basically forcing us to be the Marine Resource Committee in a sense. I'd rather have a community advisory group that's helping, but if you make me do it, I'll do it. It's what the law requires, in my opinion.
I guess my question about what the law requires is, do we have an option other than no net loss? I mean, is the law pretty specific on that?
Yeah.
So if we don't have an option, what are we debating? I guess, where are we at on that?
I think the debate is whether or not the provisions within this draft SMP achieve that no net loss, or do you want to see something more?
And there's really kind of two levels of conversation, because you have specifically these metrics that we're talking about. Oops, no, that's not gonna work. You know, you have, these metrics that we're talking about that, you know, we can add to this list, all those sorts of things, and that's how we measure and track. But, you know, any other changes that are made to the draft will have kind of, you know, cascading effects on no net loss. If we change specific development standards to be more permissive or less permissive with bulkheads, or buffers get bigger, smaller, all those things, you know, factor into that calculation of no net loss. So as you continue to have these conversations, you will certainly make decisions that move that needle. But really, the main question, or the main thought was at that programmatic scale. You know, you had comments about things that people would like to happen, and, you know, does the board wish to make changes based on any of that?
So this is the stick in the ground. We don't have a stick in the ground to measure right now. We're asking, do you like this stick? Do you want more sticks? And who do you wanna read the sticks?
What's the planning commission say on your stick analogy?
I don't think they really
They
had a lot of
approved this
comments
draft of the
about this,
SMP.
yeah.
They approved this concept, and that's the recommendation they provided to the board.
And that means that, they want additional, or,
They like the sticks that are in the SMP right now.
so the first one, does the board wish to make any changes? That's what they're saying.
That's what staff is asking.
You asked us
Yeah,
to
but what's,
explore this topic.
what's the planning commission saying?
They didn't say anything. They like it. They approved it. They said, go.
Okay, so if I parrot that, comment, then am I following the
Planning commission
planning
recommendation.
commission?
Bullet number 1 will follow the planning commission recommendations.
Well, just,
Oops, sorry.
did the planning commission debate and reject the concept of a Marine Resources Committee?
No,
So
Never
I
even
just
talked
wanted-
about
I
it.
think they
probably.
really
Yeah,
talked
that's
about
what
it.
I'm
But I
saying.
think we can put some policy in on that.
Yeah, that's what I'm just saying that, you know, they probably didn't, you know, it may not have been on their,
Should we measure it? They debated that. Yes, we have to. That's the first stick. How are we gonna measure it? Those are the designations. Who's going to measure it? They did not discuss. And that's an added piece that the board has talked about today.
So, well, let's go with the first decision point, and then we'll go with Commissioner Mentzer's suggestion.
Oh, I should say
So,
that last
The
one.
first
That's the
decision
typo that I was
is,
saying.
you know, does the board wish to make any changes to the draft SMP as they,
Relate to no
As it
net
relates
loss.
to the not net
Relate to
loss,
no
there's a
net
typo
loss.
there.
Okay, I'm gonna go with the planning commission.
well, again, I see my proposal for resource committee as a change to the draft SMP as an additional piece of what, of the process and structure for
Well,
assessing and
let me ask the question differently then, is the monitoring conditions that are listed, are commissioners okay with those, or do commissioners wish to add something additional to that?
Well, that's what I'm saying, is are we complete today to make that decision right now? Or do we have more discussion to come into that? That's all I'm wondering.
that's why I want a
What's the
committee
push?
to help us, cause I don't know, I mean, I'm fine with the ones you've outlined. I don't know if that's all the ones that need to be done. Other ones were suggested by the community. I'd like a community panel to sort of weigh in on whether to add, to answer your question. That would be the purpose of the committee, is to answer that question, our additional metrics.
We think we have the right sticks in the draft. the planning commission thinks we have the right sticks, but there might be sticks that we haven't thought of.
But there's no restriction about adding those sticks later on, is there?
Correct, exactly.
Okay, so I'm good with the planning commission
Okay.
recommendation.
Okay, and then the next,
I think there's
sorry.
a proposal, if I may.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna address, the second part. I just want to move it steps by steps because I just
Wanna
want to
get
be
there.
clear on what, we're moving forward with. The next proposal is from Commissioner Menser, which is he would like to add onto the SMP the proposal of a committee, Marine Resource Committee, to help with this monitoring process.
How about, can we change the verbiage to a balanced resource committee? Is there anything wrong with that?
Balanced Resource Committee?
Yeah, because we don't want one side to stack it or the other side to stack it. A balanced resource committee, a balanced philosophically, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there.
So, I'm sorry to interrupt. Marine is a technical term.
Mhm.
We might suggest shoreline resource committee. Because marine has a very specific meaning.
And then that would fit in a marine biologist somehow.
So our job, after you charge us with this, is to develop some draft parameters for you to consider when you're setting up this committee, down the road, not today
Yeah.
necessarily.
Okay.
Shoreline Resources Committee is fine.
Okay.
And the other question I would have is, does that need to be within the SMP or can that be in the adopting ordinance or?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be in the SMP itself, but we can explore that and make sure. But I think we have flexibility written into the draft as to how we're gonna do it, so it could be that it's some separate, like, I don't know, MOU or something like
It could
that.
be an option in the SMP that the board chooses to exercise through an additional ordinance or
Yeah.
code, so.
Yeah,
If there's a way to have like wherever you've listed the things you've listed, if there's a way to have like a flex provision to say an additional that may, to be considered by the board or a committee.
yes, the county may establish a
it's at
committee
least
to
in there.
address.
Yeah, I think it
Along
would
with
be
the other
good to add
things.
that language on the
Absolutely.
plan.
Mhm.
Just make sure we don't miss that.
Okay. Good on that?
You're good on it.
Okay, great. And as I said, we're gonna be talking about no net loss in the background, because as you talk about buffers, as you talk about docks, it affects no net loss, but yeah, so.
I just wanna
great.
celebrate every one of these wins.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you, okay.
Okay, the next one.
Shoreline buffers, all right,
So
here
we're
we go.
going in descending order of difficulty.
Yeah, yes, okay. I shouldn't have to tell anybody this, but yeah, shoreline buffers were a very, very highly commented upon topic during the public hearing. I've put the definition of buffer up here on the slide for reference, but essentially what we're talking about is the area in between a proposed development and the shoreline that is intended to protect the functions of the shoreline. Or it could be in between something that's already there and the shoreline, but it's the area between development and the water, essentially. We heard a variety of themes in public comments from a lot of different voices in the community, a lot of stakeholders. And some of the things that we heard were support for 50-foot buffers in the most highly developed shorelines. And, oops, sorry, no, that is right, okay. Support for 50-foot buffers where we have most of the residential housing on the shoreline. Support as a whole for the buffers that were proposed in the planning commission recommendation. And support for larger buffers than what is currently in the SMP draft. So those are three different thoughts, but those are comments that we heard repeatedly in the testimony.
So essentially on buffers, it was across the board. A lot of people had a lot of different things to say.
Mhm.
So nobody liked everything. How about that?
That's right. Okay, so we've got some illustrations for you.
So what we heard from the commissioners last time was pictures would be helpful to define what these actually look like. And so Andy's gonna go through the different designation areas. And these are the pictures showing, I love this concept, each one of the different types of aquatic area. So it's a clockwise?
Yeah. So as a reminder, the buffer widths that will be assigned to property depend on the shoreline environment designation it finds itself in. We wanted to have some images available of what these different areas look like. And these are just a few examples, of course. There are many more examples out there. We've got many shorelines. But here we have some areas pictured that are proposed to be designated natural, which is a designation that's given to the most pristine shorelines that are largely free from human influence. And we're really focusing on the area that's within 200 feet of the water in these images. So going clockwise from the left, the bottom left, there's the Deschutes River in an area where you see some development in the vicinity of the river, but the shorelines themselves within 200 feet are largely undisturbed. And if you zoom out, you know, this area is even one part of a larger reach that has those same characteristics. In the upper,
Do you see the picture in the river in the 200 feet?
Yeah, we got it over here too.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You got a bigger.
yeah, you've got a bigger one.
I'm looking at that one.
Yeah, and I don't have it in front of me at all. So in the upper right, that's the south end of Black Lake. So you can see a largely undisturbed area with minimal development. There is a dock pictured there, but not a whole lot else. And then the bottom right is Totten Inlet on Puget Sound. So note that on the right side of the image, the area is not very developed at all. As you move left, you can see that there's some residential development in the frame, but the shoreline itself is relatively intact, and that high degree of existing function is what would lead to an area being proposed designated as natural.
Okay, so on the
Oh, sorry,
shoreline,
let me go back.
where's the natural?
So those are all natural.
All of those are
All,
examples.
all of these shorelines are proposed to be designated natural. This is just trying to show that there's a variety of different conditions that can lead to that outcome.
And I guess I have just one question on that is, what about elevation? And how, and mainly I think that's affected by the river portion of this, because if it's a floodplain, you know, the river's gonna flood in that area. That's kind of like a no-brainer to me. But what about that elevated area so the river is going by here and there's a bit of a bluff, or maybe even a gradual. But why would that need the same designation as that flat area down here that the river winds around and runs out of the banks regularly? So that's why I'm curious about putting a definite number of feet, for an example, on something like that. Or an individual that owns property on a situation like that, and if we put a definite number of feet, even though there's no chance it's ever gonna flood, not gonna wash away, nothing's gonna happen because it's elevated, then are we effectively telling someone, well, you can't use your property because maybe your property is only 100 feet deep, you know, and if we say the buffer is 100 foot, you can't build, although you can build because you go to the hearings examiner and get an exemption, and it costs a lot of money. So I'm curious how that all fits.
We do the best we can with all of our meandering rivers. And the way to look at these pictures is you see a river, a lake, and the marine. And so each one of these is gonna be a different designation with each one of those top areas, a river, a lake, and a marine. And you hit it right, the nail on the head, Commissioner, is the planning commission looked at what we put in the draft, what was put in the draft, what ecology would potentially take. And this, what the planning commission has provided to the board, is what we believe is that first big look at it. We can't regulate every single application in the SMP. We can do our best with a draft plan, and then like you said, if there's a variance, that individual can apply for it. If they are on a steep slope and they can make the case for it doesn't have to have that same buffer, that's where it comes in the implementation process. But at this stage, the draft needs to take a wider look at being able to make those designations in these areas, which the planning commission approved.
And to your point, environmental constraints are considered as part of the shoreline environment designation process. So if something has steep slopes or floodplain or something like that, it's more likely to get a designation of natural or rural conservancy because there's constraints on the land. It's not all appropriate for residential development. So it's just one piece of all the different factors that lead up to what a shoreline should be designated as.
So that's natural. Next is.
Okay, so rural conservancy, this is the shoreline environment designation where there is maybe a higher degree of alteration than you find in the natural environment, but you still see a large amount of ecological function remaining in the shoreline area. So the bottom left is a lake that has had some degree of alteration with low-density development, vegetation removal and fill, but it still retains a large amount of vegetation in the shoreline, and the distance between the structures and the water is larger than you'd see for some of our other designations. On the upper right is, again, the Deschutes River, where you see, once again, low-density development and vegetation removal are pictured, but there is still a large amount of vegetation visible, and that distance between the structure and the water is higher. The bottom right is Eld Inlet on Puget Sound, where you can see that there are homes there and some shoreline alterations such as bulkheads and a dock, but still a large amount of vegetation visible in the shoreline area. Kind of going on a gradient from natural all the way down to the most highly developed. Looking at urban conservancy, these are similar to rural conservancy, where it's a mix of development and moderate ecological function in the shoreline area, but these areas specifically are all within the urban growth area. So the bottom left is Nisqually Reach on Puget Sound, somewhat denser development than what we saw in the rural conservancy example, but you can see that there's a significant area in between the water and the structure that is vegetated. And in this case, I believe that's also a bluff, which again, environmental constraints are one of the conservancy considerations. And then upper right is Woodland Creek with moderately dense development, but still set back a ways from the water and with vegetation still in view within the shoreline area. Bottom right is Black Lake with alterations to the shoreline pictured, but the homes are set back and several lots are treed between the structures and the water. Final example is shoreline residential. So this is the shoreline environment designation that's given to the most highly developed shorelines. The bottom left is Henderson Inlet, where you can see a lot of armoring on the shoreline and homes and lawns that are right up against the beach with very little native vegetation in the area. Upper left is Summit Lake, where again, a lot of armoring and docks and homes close to the water with very little native vegetation. And the bottom right is Lake Lawrence, similar picture, dense development, close to the water, less vegetation in view than what we see in some of the other environment designations. So these are just here to be helpful and be able to flip through, go back, but just trying to give you a picture of what these different environments look like when we talk about natural conservancy or shoreline residential. Are there any questions there?
Questions, commissioners?
So, got more on buffers, but it's just great. All right, so we can use those tools. So really, again, this is sort of a open-ended question, but the board has heard a lot about buffers from a lot of different voices and wanted to have an opportunity to dive in and discuss. So this is really that opportunity, and the question for the board is, are there any changes the board wants to see, or what areas related to the topic of buffers do you want to explore? And what information do you need to address that question? And we are here to have that conversation.
And at our last, I just remind the board at our last briefing, the Board of County Commissioners kind of started to zero in on the conservancy buffers and what those mean and where the designations lie in that. So just to kind of focus the conversation a little bit. We're not necessarily asking for a lockdown decision today, but the Planning Commission, what they recommended is what you've reviewed. And so maybe that's a good starting point. The other thing that we had talked about in the past is providing a matrix so you can see where we are now and what the designation would then allow for the future.
Commissioner Woods, go ahead.
So, on your examples, if a property owner, and I'm gonna go from the worst maybe to the best. So if a property owner on one of the residential shorelines had never developed their property, they've owned a lot for 50 years or whatever it is, and now they want to do something with and build a lot, build a house, maybe put a dock on, whatever it is, to benefit the same as all the other neighbors on that property. Is that allowed to do that? Is there a process so they can do that without breaking the bank? That's my kind of the way I'm looking at it.
So I think that picture in the upper left there is a good example, and for the sake of this conversation, let's pretend that that area in the middle that's all treed is a separate lot. So let's say this has not been developed.
Okay,
This is a shoreline residential area in the draft. Shoreline residential has a 50-foot proposed buffer. So that property would be able to develop with a 50-foot buffer. So one of the things that we're looking at with these,
Without too much headache.
yeah, it would get the same buffer as the neighbors. Same buffer as the
That's a
neighbors,
good term.
because really, we're
you.
looking at this shoreline reach scale zoomed out at multiple different lots and what is the land use in this whole big area? And we know that certain specific lots might not fit that picture, but overall in that whole shoreline reach, you're looking at what are the conditions in general.
Need out
So you can
certain
have planning units, yeah, like planning units, right?
Exactly.
So in that example, 50 feet
Okay.
under the proposed draft.
Then going back to the next urban conservancy. So let's take okay, I don't know how to best explain this, but so if we go back to and you guys are looking at that one, maybe
Turn our
this
Yeah, we
one's
can turn.
easier for everybody to see. So say we go back here and this home is not here.
Mhm.
It hasn't been developed yet.
Right.
Nothing here has taken place. The family has sat on that for the last 50 years, or however they've been paying taxes and they own the property, but they haven't decided to build yet.
Right.
Now they want to build. So this is more of a setback, even from the day this was developed. And so would that same setback apply? So I don't know how far that is, but it might be 80 feet or something to the shoreline.
So-
Now somebody wants to develop that, wants to be compensated for all those years of paying taxes. And they want to either build it and sell it or build it and live there. Is that doable?
So there's nothing there now in your scenario.
Nothing's there now.
And how close can they build?
Well,
Is that
and
what you're asking?
can they build?
Yeah.
And what would it take? I mean, would it match the rest of this? So roughly the same footprint back would be allowed here, or, you know, maybe we'd set back, so this one's a little further back, so
So you can do
maybe
remind us
split the difference or something.
the proposed buffer in urban conservancy.
It's
That's what
100,
we decided, right?
100 feet. is
100
proposed.
feet.
And what if there's not 100 feet?
If there's not 100 feet, that would trigger the variance criteria. And I think the latest iteration of the draft has actually made it increased flexibility for landowners and kind of what you were getting at about the conditional use permits or going to the hearings examiner. It's looked at that and said, maybe there's an administrative path before it needs to get there. So
Yeah, that's what I'm
yeah,
trying
we would
to.
work with them to try
get
to,
there somehow.
if it's it's what we call a constrained lot. If it's 100-foot deep and a 100-foot buffer, you'd be into those variance provisions and looking for reasonable use of the property.
And that's the flexibility that we baked into the new draft, where potentially they don't need to go all the way through the hearing examiner process.
Yeah, okay, and I wanna use this as the example here, because this one is obviously set back a little more, this one's a little more. So I'm trying to include some kind of a fairness doctrine or something here, so that, okay, remember, this one is not here. So now it's gonna be built, so maybe instead of the front being here, maybe the front would be back here. And I don't know what the distance is, but say it's 80 feet from here to here now. So, you know, maybe it would be 90 feet or something. Is there a way to make that a doable process? And if this is in rural America, can we make sure that the septic system, drain field at least, is up here, as far from the water as possible, so we can protect the environment at the same time? Is that somehow included?
I think that is something that the board could choose to add to that menu of topics you're gonna talk about in future briefings, because right now we don't have that on the list. We go with the
That's
health
what
department.
the drain fields are one of my concerns.
Don't we have, isn't that public health code and?
It-
I don't know the
septic
answer.
It
rules
is,
or-
but they have a different set of considerations than than planning does when it comes to the environment, right? They're looking at the distance between wells and all those sorts of things.
They don't look at shoreline
Not
stuff.
necessarily those issues as first and foremost. So that's certainly something that we could explore. And you did receive public comments supporting, you know, more regulation of septic systems.
Before I forget, because Commissioner Edwards brought it up, can you add to your list of topics for future briefing, the variance process? Because we got public comment about that, how tight it is and who makes those decisions.
Yep. And those, yeah, and those things have been moving targets. You were mentioning the hearings examiner. One of the things the planning commission looked at was what are the types of permits that shouldn't have to go to hearings examiner and when can staff make those decisions? And so they did some tweaking to that and what came to you. Ecology made some comments on that, so some of it tweaked back the other direction. So that's definitely been a moving target. And we can talk
But then
about
there's
it.
another issue about, well then, regardless of who's making the decision, what are the, how specific are the criteria by which you're able to get a variance?
Right.
Versus having it be like
Yeah.
very flexible and then potentially inconsistent. And then the second question is who makes the decision, whether it's a hearing examiner or a staff or whatever.
Can absolutely bring that stuff back. And yeah, short answer to your first question, there's criteria in state law that we have to implement for variances. So what you see as our requirements will mirror what's in the WAC.
Maybe one more thing on this. So that building that's there now, for an example, and we can't see it, but say there's on the largest part of the building is a carport. All we see is roof line right now. So we want grandma to come live with us. Can we convert that carport to a bedroom?
So the draft is actually a lot more flexible when it comes to, this gets into the conforming structures, right? This would be a.
Yeah, that's where we
conforming
get to the
structure.
conforming, non-conforming.
And what the draft does, it makes it clear that if you're in the footprint of your existing structure, if you're not having additional impacts outside and in the buffer, the SMP is not gonna require permits for that. You're up to whatever your other zoning is and whatever other building codes you need to follow, but the
That would
master
be an
program.
ADU code that has to be
Exactly,
in place.
yeah, but shorelines would say if it's all in the footprint and you're not disturbing anything,
And we
We're good.
liberalized that.
Yeah, and you provided
policy as
flexibility on the
well, right?
ADUs anyways, yeah.
It used to be like, even if you were in the same footprint, if it was like 50% value
Right,
or whatever.
right,
you
correct.
know, it was just a quick process.
Yep.
and-
that's all gone away.
And we didn't have them in the rural area except for family member units at one time,
Exactly,
so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, are there,
Go ahead, Commissioner Spencer.
My turn?
Yep.
Okay, so I have questions about I think of the buffer matrix as like not 3 by 3, I know that you've got urban, conservancy and rural, but as you say, that's just whether it's in the UGA, it's not really
right,
distinction. So I think of it as marine, lake, riparian, residential, conservancy, natural. So 9 basically buffer categories. And I think I can live with 7 of them that the planning commission came up with, but I'm struggling on 2 of them. Marine conservancy, I'm just not gonna be able to accept that. I'm gonna support the previous draft buffer. But my questions relate to marine residential, because when you've provided Commissioner Edwards is usually always, I think this came from his request, actually, the jurisdictional comparison. And I mean, I'm just wondering how we get where we are. I mean, if Kitsap's got 85 and Mason's got 100 and Blue's got 150 and Pierce has got 75 and we're sitting at 50, I just, that's gonna have to be, and I've heard the argument of the planning commission chair, and he's convinced me as to lakes, it's already built up, it's 3.5%, they shifted a lot of folks into I heard all the arguments and they're pretty convincing. But when it comes to the marine environment, which I think is critical to have a little bit of extra protection, how do we look our constituents in the eye and say we've got the lowest buffer of any jurisdiction that staff presented for marine residential? How do I look my constituents in the eye and say that that's the right spot to be at? Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife recommended previous buffer, which would have been, in this case, 85 feet. Marine residential. Tribes weighed in on that, our former planning director weighed in on that. I mean, I've got a stack of folks that say that that's, and again, there's so many folks I'm trying to balance here. There's so many folks that are on the lake environment, and I'm not gonna mess with that one. That was the number one thing we heard at the public hearing was, don't adjust that 50-foot buffer. Now, again, they might have been talking marine and lake, but I'm gonna confine my concern for the sake of balance to the marine residential and just, I guess I'm asking you guys, like, what, you were there when the planning commission hashed this through. Were they concerned about the fact that every other jurisdiction has a higher buffer? Did that give them heartburn like it's giving me a little bit of heartburn?
May 2019, this was a while ago. I don't remember that, so, I don't remember the specific reaction to that specific table during that meeting. But I know that, and there was a variety of opinion on the planning commission, but I think the majority of the planning commission in that recommendation that came forward as the planning commission recommendation were comfortable with the 50-foot marine.
Is part of the, I'm trying to reach to get there, but is part of the argument that that's where we have been?
Absolutely.
I
That's
mean,
where we have been, that's where people have developed to. You have a lot of these areas that are already built out, so I think the argument would be, if you increase that buffer, what are you gaining other than putting a lot of properties into?
Yeah, that's an argument that I had.
Legally
I guess I'm
conforming
wondering
status.
about these other, maybe these
Sure.
other, maybe Kitsap, I'll look at Rob, maybe Kitsap was always 85 feet. So when they did a re-upping 85 feet didn't cause that. But maybe you increased it from,
I think it was increased.
you think it was increased, okay.
So
And if I could put you on the spot, what was your board's consideration as to why to increase from 50, let's say, to 85?
Oh, yeah. So that is back, that change would have occurred in 2012.
Okay.
So that's testing the gray
You
cells.
there?
Quite a bit. I was there. And it was most likely based on the best available science of the time and in consultation with ecology and the work group in making that recommendation.
So in Commissioner Edwards' scenario that he described on that marine residential, if that lot wasn't developed and we pushed the buffers up, that would be harder to develop in line with the rest of the houses that were there. You would have a headache trying to build in line with houses. You'd have to be set back further.
And I think that's reasonable. And so the buffer you might be referring to is if one place is up to here, another place is back here, somehow to split the difference here, rather than force this one to go all the way back, split it somehow a little bit, and then maybe you'd succeed in getting that done. I don't know how to put that verbiage in.
It's a variance, right?
So
Or view protections, one or the other.
are you suggesting in the marine area to raise the buffer from 50 feet to something in the middle?
No, I'm just saying sometimes, I think they even try to do that now when they're working with folks. They, rather than just because the buffer says, unless there's really a big pushback with an attorney or something, I think they try to work it out with the person that's building the home to, well, look at, this place is here, this place is here. How about you go right here? And I think they try to be fair in that regard. I don't know if that's in the,
I don't think that's in the draft.
It is not, it was removed by the planning commission.
that way.
The planning commission requested to remove the view protection standards, so there's no ability for existing development to kind of control what the buffer is gonna be on that new one. It's whatever that buffer is. So if your buffer is 50 feet, you can be at 50 feet, whether that, no matter what that does to surrounding properties.
So I think getting back to the question about Kitsap, there wasn't an expansion of that buffer, but there are view protections that were incorporated into it, so you could do an averaging based on the siting.
Yeah, I think average is what I'm referring to.
Well, I don't wanna complicate things. I'm just putting my cards on the table. I'm struggling with that one. I'm not supportive of the marine conservancy buffer as it's in the draft, and I can accept all the other buffer categories that the planning commission came up with.
So what would be your proposal?
The previous draft staff, it's in the decision points, it looks like it's 250.
It's 250?
For the shoreline.
For the
No, for
Marine Conservancy, Marine Conservancy, you're proposing is 250.
Well,
Okay.
I wanna confirm that with Andy, that's what you've got in your,
Currently, yeah, anything that is currently a conservancy or natural marine shoreline has a 250-foot buffer today. But it's confusing because the buffers are proposed to change, but also the designations may change. So you may end up, I don't want this buffer, but well, we changed your designation anyway, so you're not getting that buffer, you're getting something else.
no, I wanna stick with that with respect to Marine Conservancy, I don't see.
Both urban and rural.
Yeah, those are just depends on whether you're in the UGA or not.
And then the lakes 100 feet, you're okay with those?
I'm okay with the lakes.
And then the natural
I'm okay with all the natural,
and the streams?
all the streams are fine.
Okay, and then so you're,
I'm only focused on two areas,
So
marine residential and marine conservancy, both categories.
so marine residential and which one?
Marine conservancy,
And marine conservancy, the rural and the,
I treat those the same in my head.
okay. And so with the, just trying to
Yeah.
walk through your train of thought, Commissioner Menser. Okay, with the shoreline residential, with the marine, you're not, with the 50 feet, what is your proposal then?
The previous draft was 85.
So your proposal
There's also
is
75.
85 or?
Yeah, 85. There's also 75 in Pierce County, for example. So I mean, 75, 85 is where I'm thinking versus 50.
So,
But the-
and then with the conservancy for marine, it's at 250, what is your,
It's at 120.
oh, it's at,
It's the same for lake and marine. I'm suggesting that we separate lake and marine.
and then have it as it was.
As it has been for marine, and we're reducing it, it sounds like, for lake. Conservancy.
So I thought,
No.
for conservancy, it was 125, it was separated
I think we need
because,
to get a graph together.
yeah, because right here.
We need
it's
our
one-
whiteboard. I could,
125 and 250.
We're grabbing a whiteboard.
Oh, this is
Hang on,
from
actually,
earlier
I
drafts,
just
okay, and
remembered
then
to print.
they put it together. Yeah, we need a
lake,
whiteboard.
yeah, lake and marine
This is
versus
the
urban
difference.
and rural.
Okay,
Those are two different subcategories.
20 more minutes.
So we do have one visual aid, Jeremy's gonna go and see
10
if
more
you can get it.
minutes?
20
20 more minutes?
Okay, you need a break or we can chug along?
I don't need a break.
Okay,
Jeremy's going to get a picture too, that we printed.
I'm an old soldier.
Can I just write up here?
Yeah.
so then,
Just so, cause you're asking to walk through my thinking, so. there it is.
Music to my ears when a commissioner goes to the whiteboard.
what is,
Rest in peace.
We haven't seen,
Not to be confused with rest in
we
peace.
haven't
Riparian
seen,
system.
we haven't seen a marine conservancy photograph yet, though, did we? Did we have that?
Yes, so this is marine,
That's Marine
This is Nisqually
Conservancy?
Reach, and this is
You have
Elk
two.
Inlet,
You have
Yeah.
two marine conservancies, one urban, one rural,
right.
up there.
and Commissioner Menser
I'm
is
collapsing
combining
them into
them.
one conservancy. This would be urban and rural.
And the buffers are different for those proposed.
For lakes, right here, right? 100, 125, is that what it is? or-
Yeah, and that's the same for marine, what's proposed. So I had done,
Do you forget about that?
I did forget about it,
Do you,
so.
no, do you feel good?
Anyway, I'm only focused on those two circles. That's, and you guys can fill in the rest of the
So-
numbers.
So this is not ready for prime time, it's
Yeah.
scribbled on.
What Josh is handing out is, we had developed a fact sheet on buffers and it has the proposed buffer widths on the back. I have written in pen what the current buffer is for each of these areas, so for comparison, apples to apples. Some extras to,
And where's the planning commission at?
the planning commission is in the proposed, so what's typed in there on the fact sheet itself, these are the buffers that were put forward by the planning commission. The only thing I've written in is what we're doing today.
So this what is in print. No, the handwritten.
Yeah.
that's
Not the
proposed-
handwritten.
That's the proposed by the planning commission, included on the plan, the draft plan.
So 50. 250. I can't read the dark green, 200 and 200 here?
Yeah, 200 for marine, 200 for lake, 250 for stream.
And this is. Okay, so that's what we have.
Okay, so can we start with the easy ones and then go into the more where there's gonna be a little bit more,
It's like
where there's
tic-tac-toe,
proposed
cross off. over.
changes?
Hollywood Squares.
So then
yes.
let's start with the streams,
Love it.
because that one. The
Red
stream,
is my.
You're up there, Andy.
so the
That's
streams
what we have.
is,
She's going easy first.
And the planning commission is the same as everything.
yeah, it's
Everything.
two
Planning
fifty
commission's the black up there.
Yeah, I mean, the 250 on
For the
streams
streams.
is what the planning commission is recommending.
Okay, that's the planning commission recommendation, streams 250, that's what it was in the earlier draft. Are commissioners okay with that buffer designation, or are there suggested changes?
Okay, I do have some suggested changes in
For the
that.
streams?
Even for the streams, and it's because of the elevation. I have no problem with streams in the floodplain area, but I do if there's a nice gradual elevation. What is it hurting to be 100 feet back
Okay.
from the stream?
So then, from the streams designation, Commissioner Edwards, I'm not sure if anyone can write it. His suggested is 100 feet.
Well, only in the right elevation area. That's what I think we're missing the boat here by not recognizing the difference in elevation. That's my concern with the whole
Is that a
thing.
distinction recognized in the scientific
I
literature?
think
that
the real
you reduce the
consideration
buffer
here.
When you go up in elevation?
Shoreline streams, we're talking about the largest rivers that we have, so it's anything that's 20 cubic feet per second and above. So the Nisqually River, Black Lake, those sorts of things, or Black River. And so, you know, the floodplain is only one consideration. So it is floodplain and making sure we keep structures out of that. It is in those areas of high bank, making sure structures are far enough back that they're not gonna be at risk from the bluff. But there's also, you know, there's the environmental considerations. There's knowing that these are significant waterways that are providing salmon habitat. And, you know, those riparian areas provide a lot of function with the shading and the pollution filtration and large woody debris recruitment into the streams, all those sorts of things. I believe we arrived at that 250, you know, that's came from the 2012 Critical Areas Ordinance Update. So we've been doing
Came from what?
the 2012 Critical Areas Ordinance Update, and it had to do with, at the time, there was a biological opinion from
National Marine Fisheries.
Natural Marine Fisheries Service on FEMA's floodplain regulations and saying these are not protecting these areas, and jurisdictions to comply with this should consider these larger buffers. And so the county went with 250, and we're proposing to retain that for those same reasons today.
And
Wasn't there a note in your memo about that it could mess our community flood rating up if we?
Potentially, I mean, there's other, regardless of what the buffer set out, the floodplain regulations still must be adhered to. So even if the buffer was set at 100, if the floodplain was 150 out, then you'd still be building back there.
You have that super high rating that helps folks with their insurance.
That's
and-
correct.
So Commissioner Edwards, I see what you're getting at. You want
Let
flexibility.
me illustrate this since the whiteboard is out.
Yeah.
Let me know if you need the green.
I'm not gonna raise this.
blue.
There you go.
There you go, for the streams.
And I think what you're saying, if this is the river stream, it's gonna be two scenarios, right? You have the normal, your words, floodplain.
Yeah.
And a home will be, a structure will be here. Their proposal is 250.
Retaining the 250. Which
We retain it 250. Your concern is when you have this, exaggerating.
Yeah, that's maybe exaggerated,
Yeah.
but
And
yes.
you're saying this 250 is an issue perhaps for you.
That's an issue for me, yeah, a fairness issue of
But perhaps-
why.
because because you're saying, I just.
Yeah.
This has an effect, right?
Yeah.
But also the location of this structure is governed by other regulation and the steep slopes, because in here, this has to take into account where a particular dwelling should have to be
Sure,
located.
because of the slide
Because
potential.
of the.
And channel migration as
channel
well.
migration.
Yeah,
So I think is looking at the 250 from that level singularly may not give you the answers to that. Because in this case, other regulation may apply.
yes, if it was that steep, but it's not, there's a lot of property that it's not that steep, that a slide is the issue. It's a gradual.
But still,
elevation
even if-
increase.
Even if it's like this,
And what about agriculture on these setback issues? Is there anything that affects ag activity? And the whole valley down in the Nisqually is in the floodplain, basically. And they have all their ag activity going on there. That can continue?
Yeah, the SMP is not retroactive, and specifically it mentions that existing and ongoing agriculture is not subject to those new master program provisions. It's only if someone's gonna come in and farm in an area that has never been farmed, or I think if they're building a new structure, that's when newer rules will kick in. But existing ongoing uses or changing the type of ag use, those are allowed without SMP coming in.
And remember, a measurement program for existing and ongoing ag is the voluntary stewardship program, which we've already stood up and we're entering and we're working on.
And that would, get you over these restrictions to a degree?
That is what addresses the critical area question for existing and ongoing agricultural uses in these areas. And with that program, they go through and they measure on a basin-wide approach water quality and water issues and agricultural effects on it and making sure we maintain that no net loss.
So you thought you were starting with the easy one,
Yeah.
Commissioner Mejia? Do you have anything?
Okay,
Where's the planning commission? That's where's their recommendation?
250.
'Cause
On
they-
the streams is 250.
Everything is
they've-
black.
Okay,
The black is the
okay.
planning
So
commission. The red is
they've
my
studied
suggestion.
this much more than we have. That's why I keep referring to the planning commission is how many hearings and how much input, and here we are an hour.
maybe,
Well, with all due respect, I've been reading about, I've spent a lot more than an
Oh,
hour.
I know you,
on my-
I know.
I think Commissioner Minzer made a really good point there. Everything in black is what the planning commission has approved to move forward.
Okay.
And Commissioner Minzer's suggestion are the items in red.
Out of deference to them, I probably would have drawn a little different graph myself, but out of respect for what they did, I'm okay with 7 of those 9 boxes, and I may be okay with 8 out of the 9 boxes. I'd like to debate with you guys the marine residential. I might be convinced to go with 50 just because we've been there before. I'm definitely not gonna support 100, 125 on the Marine Conservancy. That one, to me, just has to be, that one, I'm pretty set where I'm at on that. I gotta go with the earlier draft staff recommendation that's supported by a whole range of tribes, organizations, and
maybe
So-
that will be a
So I
suggestion.
wanted to, to go through
Holistic.
the items where there was agreement from the planning commission and then
So
one
here-
other
here-
commissioner. And that's why I wanted to get through the easy parts.
Here's the
that I
planning commission
split-
recommendation.
Okay, I'm good with the planning commission.
Okay, so you're okay with the streams, the 250 feet?
Yeah, I'm not, the way it's laid out, okay.
All the
Okay.
black that has no red.
Okay,
If the planning commission has studied this and said this'll work,
Light?
I'm kind of inclined, because they've been working with it.
yeah, so then the natural is next and the recommendation from the planning commission was 200 feet.
what about lakes?
Yeah,
Can we
that's
just
what,
take that
200
Are
as
you
well.
okay with that, Commissioner Mejia?
I would like to debate lakes a little
Okay,
bit more.
fair enough.
so take that off,
See where there's
That one,
agreement.
all of the lakes?
all the lakes, yeah.
Well, not with the urban and rural, the conservancy and the natural, I'm okay with those designations.
This one?
Yeah, but I would like to like walk through the
Concurrence-
residential.
Concurrence with the board.
I'm okay with,
All the blue dots were agreed, sounds like.
yeah.
So
I
red dot.
don't know that I'm, and on the residential, I wanna refer to the map to make sure we get it right, is this one right here, where all the docks are in place. And, this is for new construction, right?
Right, new construction on vacant lots or adding on to any of these structures. Or structures like these.
And many of these are within, I don't know, they're, most of them. Most of them are within the 50-foot thing, but some of them I can see look like they're 25 or 30.
I have a T next to Commissioner Mintzer's and an M next to Commissioner Mejia's.
Do you like to revise the proposal? The proposal right now is 50 feet on residential lakes.
I would just like to have more discussion on it, and that's kind of why. Let's see.
I have.
So
to-
the 100, okay, never mind, I got it. Sorry, I was trying to. write down
Urban,
the-
urban and rural,
yeah.
slash, urban conservancy, they, I guess where there's, if you're in a UGA, they recommended a slightly smaller buffer.
Okay. Okay, so then,
Okay,
since it's 10:54, can we bring this back?
Yeah.
Start with those three.
Start with those three
Mhm.
and discuss, walk through these
So
three.
just to conclude this
yeah,
conversation.
take a picture of that, will you?
Just to conclude, the board is agreeing on
250 feet.
250 feet. The board is agreeing in lakes on the conservancy and the natural,
For
in, rural and urban.
one,
100, 125
Yeah.
and 200. And also the board is agreeing on 200 and natural for marine. It's just would like to have a confirmation on that.
Blue dots.
Yep.
I think we're agreed.
And I'll
Yeah.
take a picture just to
Yep.
capture your decision, okay?
Yeah.
So then we'll come back and revisit the other proposal.
But let's keep a visual of that up in place though.
I'll take a picture.
We can even probably turn this into something that says, like, this is the board's. This is
Yeah,
where
you
you're
could
at.
just
So far, here.
Those are
Yeah.
shaded
Maybe you
green,
can
those
put
are
in a
shaded,
little- I'll send you the.
okay, perfect.
Matrix.
Okay, great. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip over the fourth topic we teed up today, but just to close out here, I just wanted to show you briefly, this is the list of topics that's still on the menu. And I wrote down today, drain fields and septics and then variance process, but just wanted to, for full disclosure, this is what we captured at the last briefing. So hopefully this looks right, or you recall, these are the ones. If there's anything else,
We'll come back with the matrix question too.
exactly, we'll come back with the one we didn't get to today, so.
The only one I don't recognize up there is the flooding piece. What was that? Was that a public comment or one of the
That was-
commissioners?
Yeah, so we got public comment on that where, and we got, I think it was 2 to 3 different, public comments where, people were saying that the marking was higher and they wanted to know that, and so that's kind of why we asked about the flooding issues, and the regulations of frequently flooded areas and the connections to the SMP, just because we heard that in public comment and we wanted to see how it kind of all connected in.
You were referencing the flood of record marker that was on a nearby utility pole that determined their flood level and questioning that and how that interplays with the SMP regulations, so.
Yep, so we'll run that to ground and.
Yep.
So our next time together is the 26th of July.
Oh, I think that got moved, I thought that got moved to August 3rd,
Oh, did it?
I thought so.
Still on my calendar.
Okay, we'll confirm that, but that's what I had heard from Jamie, so,
Well,
okay.
We made headway.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think we
absolutely.
made really good
Thank you.
headway. Thank you, commissioners, for the discussion, and thank you so much to staff for breaking it down as much as possible so we can come to these decision points. We made 3
Oh, this is
2.5.
huge.
Yeah, this is great.
That's huge.
Decision points today, so
just thank you, and with that, we will adjourn and he'll pick up. Thank you.
Thank you.